I was pretty strong, benching over 500 pounds. But once I was not able to move, that's when my unhealthy eating really got me into trouble. Out of convenience and not being able to cook or just being uncomfortable all the time, I resorted to a lot more processed foods. And then my health became more and more than I just wasn't healing. It's really a night and day difference looking back on it. Back when I was that big, I didn't really view it as too much of an issue, which right now looking back, I'm like, I can't believe I used to live like that. They're like, your heart's not exploding from eating all this red meat and you're able to go. I'm like, yeah, I feel great. Hello, Dr. Baker. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Perfect, Todd. Thanks for doing this. This is later than our usual time, which is fine. What part of the world are you located?
I live just probably about half an hour away from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay, very nice. I just talked to someone from Columbus not long ago. Anyway, tell me a little bit, Tyler, about your background. Let's go get started.
My background is I've been into working out, and then I've always been a big eater. Meat's been a big portion of my life for the majority of my life, but going through high school, I would always just eat whatever I could, put on as much size, trying to be as strong as possible. In 2021, I suffered a work-related back injury that kept me immobile. I was pretty much close to about 300 pounds at that point in time. And then before then, I was pretty strong, benching over 500 pounds. But once I was not able to move, that's when my unhealthy eating really got me into trouble. And then out of convenience and not being able to cook or just being uncomfortable all the time, I resorted to a lot more processed foods. And then my health became more and more than I just wasn't healing. And then right now, for about 7 months of that, I finally got surgery. Then in January last year is when I finally, January 2022 is when I finally switched over to no processed seed oils or any refined carbs. And then I lost about 40 pounds in the first 40 days. And then after that, I gained the ability to pretty much run, which I did not have before, probably about in June of last year. And then in December, I signed up for my first ultra race that I completed in February of this year. And I did another ultra race since then. And I am currently training for another my first 100-mile race. That's in the end of July 29th and 30th.
Okay, that's quite a change. So you went from bench pressing 500 pounds to injuring your back. So tell me how you hurt your back. What was a work-related injury you had?
My full-time job, I'm a firefighter paramedic. We had a CPR run. We exhausted everything that we could on scene. So we had to transport. We had him on a Reeves device. And then I was at the head. There was no room to rotate the gentleman in the basement. He was large in stature himself, but it was more positional. And he was at some small cellar steps. When I went to lift him head first, go up the stairs on the Reeves, I put a lot of torsion on my back, trying to drag him out. He was falling off the Reeves. I caught and overcompensated multiple times. And by then, my back was jacked. That was in April 11th. And then from April 11th of 2021, it took me 7 months to get the surgery from that point in time. But they did a lumbar hemilaminectomy on my L4, L5, and a discectomy at the same location. Is with the sum of what got me back. From as far as the process of coming back into the rehab process, I initially was doing okay. Then my sleep just became worse and worse. The more I became unhealthy, because at that point my weight was getting worse because I wasn't moving. I wasn't nearly as mobile. So my GERD got worse. And then I only could be comfortable on my right side. So I was only sleeping probably about 5 hours, about once out of every 3 nights. And then that's when they got me to actually be on Percocet for the first time. And then eventually I got to a point where it was after my first spinal injection, when I lost the mobility to be able to pick up my 2-month-old daughter out of her car seat. Whereas that's where it really started to go more so downhill. I went from probably at that point being able to start to be able to walk a mile once again to not being able to walk it down the block. And then with it being a workers' comp, they pretty much got to go the steps that they follow. And then they strongly advised me to go down, they get a second spinal injection from the same physician, which did not help at all whatsoever. And then from after that, I was able to get the surgery, and then progress stalled on the rehab. And then it really didn't start taking off until after I got my diet on track in January. So I had the surgery in November of 2022, November 11th. And then January 4th was the first day where I did not do refined carbs or refined oils. And I was able to return to work full duty on February 20th of 2022.
Okay, so you were working with the fire department as doing paramedic stuff. You're lifting somebody, apparently a large person with a reefs type of stretcher, injured your back, developed a lot of pain, started eating garbage, I guess. What was your diet prior to that? What were you eating to get? How much did you weigh at the time? You mentioned 500 pounds, which is huge. What did you weigh about? You had to weigh at least a decent amount to do that, correct?
Yes. I was pretty much close to around the same weight at that point in time, but I was still pretty active, relatively speaking. A lot of my diet consisted of eating just pretty much seeing whatever I could, eating it. Like I was the kind of guy that would go lift heavy, then afterwards go smash about 3 or 4 Chick-fil-A sandwiches and a large fry, and got to eat big to get big. And then it didn't really bother me too much at that point in time because I was like, I'm strong. This is just the price that you got to pay for that. But once I wasn't moving on it at that point in time, it obviously caught up to me, but it wasn't the first thought of catching up to me because of the mindset with the back injury. You're more so like, poor me, and then don't know what to do. You don't really look at your diet or your prerequisites for possibly inhibiting your situation.
How old were you at the time, just out of curiosity?
I was 29. I had my 30th birthday right before my surgery. Okay. I'm 31. I'll be 32 this year.
Okay. So fairly young. Yeah. Got big and strong. I can remember at your age, I was similarly big, strong, eating a lot, and eventually caught up with me in a different way. I didn't end up with a sort of back injury, fortunately. And obviously, were you have pain shooting down your leg, or this is often what we will see with some of these lumbar disc injuries?
Started at on the left side of my back, went down the left side of my hamstring. It didn't really go down to my calf, but it was profound burning that was pretty much, it didn't go all like my big toe, but it went towards the second toe. And then it was predominantly the left leg until after the first spinal injection that I started to have pain go down the right as well.
Okay. So you have the surgery, they do a hemilaminectomy, which for those who aren't familiar, it's just part of the as we have our lumbar bodies and we have the enclosure over the top of that, and so we remove part of that to take some of the pressure off there. Did that cause immediate improvement in your symptoms, the surgery?
No. Immediately after surgery, my first thing that I remember coming out of anesthesia is being in like a felt like it was out of my experience because I woke up, my chest wall wasn't moving, but I was able to move my eyes over to the right where I was able to see my systolic pressure was 82. Then the next one that they got was about 74 systolic. And then my face was frozen. And then I could see everybody in the OR panicking, where they ended up giving me epi and then something else. And then eventually, relatively quickly, I was able to start breathing again. And then I asked where my wife was. And then that was originally supposed to be an outpatient procedure, but then I ended up being in the hospital for 2 days. The first 4 days was pretty awful. It took me about 2 days to actually be able to get up from a chair with the assistance of a walker to be able to go use the bathroom. And then on the 4th day, I was pretty constipated from all the pain medicine and the lack of mobility and not drinking as much because if you're hurting like that, you don't really want to get up and use the bathroom in the first place. But it's a kind of a double-edged sword if you get that constipated when you're taking the pain meds. When I was had the really bad episode of constipation, my heart rate was over 200 just because of the amount of stress that I was. And then I knew something had to change at that point in time. And that's when I started to actually went off the pain meds and actually start to actually try to drastically cut back my weight so I could get up and move at more at that point in time.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like maybe from the anesthetic, you had the hypotension, which they treated, and then you just spent more time in the hospital than anticipated, which sometimes happens with surgery. What compelled you to decide I'm going to cut out eating all this processed food? What was it? Was it just the fact that you had surgery or the pain you were in? What made you decide to do that?
I know it was a pretty straightforward thing, like they cut out bread and is what it started off. Bread and refined oils, or refined oils and refined sugars was two big things that I said, if I'm not going to eat that, I would be able to cross out a whole slew of things and basically say no processed food at that point in time. Then it would make sure that I would pretty much have to cook my food, which would put more work into actually preparing the meal instead of just trying to get something that's convenient. So putting more work in and actually getting something healthier instead of trying to get that satisfaction from the something that's quick, pre-prepared. And then everybody, most people know at the end of the day that processed stuff that comes into a full wrapper like Pop-Tarts can't be good for you if you just sit around eating Pop-Tarts. So it was pretty much a no-brainer decision like at that point. That's when I was that big. That was something that was sticking on my head. That I was like, I'm eating garbage. I could cut these out. And then that's going to very much eliminate a lot of things.
And once you said within a month, you went from surgery, unable to really do much, to back to work at full duty. Is that fair to say?
No, it was a little bit longer than that because I had surgery November 11th of 2021. And then December was a month where I didn't really make all that much improvement. And then January is when I started to make very drastic improvement. And then February 20th was my first day to be able to return to work. So the whole stint was actually about 3 months from the surgical date, a little bit over 3.
Okay. And you started the diet when in relation to the surgery? Was it pretty much right after or fairly rapidly after?
I started to eat clean, a little bit cleaner, just be a little bit more conscious. Not long after the surgery, it was probably about a week and a half. But when I actually cut out the refined carbs and refined oils was about January 4th of 2022.
Okay. So a year and a half ago or so, something like that. And you lost, how much weight did you end up losing overall to where you're at now?
I was about 305 at that point in time when I got back from doing some physical therapy exercises. When I had a physical checkup on the 14th of February, my apologies, before getting approval to return back to work on the 20th, I was at 265. Yesterday morning, I was about 209.
Okay, so
before I went out running.
So almost 100-pound change just about 100-pound change. And like you're 209. You look like you're pretty. How tall are you, by the way?
I am 5'10".
5'10". Okay. And what has happened with regard to strength and things like that? Have you been able to maintain some of the strength or much of the strength?
My core lifts are not what they used to be. I'm sure that if I dedicated a lot of time to my bench press, which bench press after the hemilaminectomy is not very comfortable at all. But like accessory stuff, that's like my arms and my shoulders, I barely lost any at all. And a lot of my training actually diverted away to actually a lot more running. So I don't think it's really fair to say that I got potentially like vastly weaker because I don't have a really good comparison point because I was mobile and then able to lift heavy. Then I was not really able to lift heavy for close to a year. And then really transitioned over to more of a cardio aspect. I'm sure I lost a lot of muscle mass in that period of immobility. But right now I'm able to do about 380 with my feet on the bench. But I I cannot get in that position with my feet on the ground because that's just too much strain to hyperextend my back. And then I don't want to take that chance of getting hurt. But I'm able to run and do other things that I never thought I would ever be able to run a 5K, let alone be able to run ultra marathons. The furthest I've gone as of right now is 32 and a half miles continuously.
Yeah, that's cool. That's quite an achievement. And to still be able to put up close to 400 pounds with your feet off the bench is also pretty impressive. What is your diet since you're not eating ultra processed food? What are you eating? What does the diet look like?
Now it's actually, since I'm actually trying to keep most inflammation down and then actually dialed in. Whenever I add up more mileage or if I'm trying to recover from injury, I recently had a sprained ankle, but I take out even fruit at that point in time because honestly, if I have fruit at night, I did an anecdotal. It doesn't really help. It might help me use the bathroom in the morning, but that's really about it. Right now, it is pretty much straight beef for the most part, and then I'll add either some sour cream or butter for some extra fat and extra calories, since I go through a lot when I run 10 plus miles on a lot of days. And then I also, surprisingly, a lot of days I drink close to a gallon of whole milk.
Okay, so you're pretty much an animal-based diet for the most part, it sounds like, as far as what you're able to do. And so with that, you're able to run ultra marathons, still lift heavy. And then when you're working, are you doing a lot of shift work? I know a lot of firefighters do a lot of shift-related work. Is that what you're doing?
Yes, sir. I got off this morning. Our shifts are 24 hours on, 48 hours off. So basically, it's not like normal jobs where you have designated break times. Like, yes, when you're at the station, other than trains and stuff like that, as long as you're not on a detail, for a lot of it, the time is yours, which that's a big advantage for my training. Then but when it comes to diet, and then it could be a disadvantage sometimes too. Whereas tying in this carnivore diet, I found it has been a huge advantage because every time we transport somebody to the hospital, we go into the squad room, they got all kinds of junk food, all kinds of goodies that are constantly in your face. And if you go there 10 times a day, you got that temptation 10 times. But if you're actually more satisfied, it's a lot easier to say no. And then if you're not hungry, then you're not going to grab a snack here, a snack there. Before I got hurt, every single time that I would make a transport to the hospital, even if I wasn't hungry, I was just eating out of straight boredom, which I don't do that anymore whatsoever. So I'm able to go a pretty decent amount of time without eating. It's not because I'm actively trying to do intermittent fasting. It's just how it works out, just due to my satiating and how I feel comfortable. My eating routine right now, a lot of times I'll have a big meal like around 6 o'clock at night, and then I'll wake up about 4:30 in the morning, have some coffee and some water and some salt. Then I'll do my morning training. And then usually around 9:30, 10 o'clock is when a lot of times I'll have my first meal. And then I pretty much won't have a lunch, and then I'll eat again at dinner. The way that ties in, it pretty much ties in very similarly at work too with that evening schedule. And then if I got meat that's already prepared, I'm able to take it with me and then do what I need to do.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a place to cook at the fire station? I guess you're at a fire station. Could you barbecue and stuff out there if you wanted to, or what's the setup like there?
There is. At our station, we got an oven. It's pretty much like you would have over the most part of your house. And our outlying stations, the headquarters station has an industrial, not industrial, but a commercial stove, which is different from all the other stations just because of the size. They can have up to 11 people there. So for the most part, when I'm at work for convenience, I'll bring in straight ground beef because that cooks up very easily into a pan. It cooks up quick. In case if we get a run, I could throw it hot inside of a Tupperware container and bring it with me. But a lot of times I try to have my food pre-prepared the night before at my house and then bring it in. An example of that is before my last shift that I got off this morning, the night before I had a sous vide, a rump roast, and then brought that in and then had 4 beef patties from a local farmer that I was able to cook alongside with the dinner portion.
What?
Also,
Okay, go ahead.
sorry. And then also for me personally, we're having the gallon of whole milk that helps hold me over a fairly decent amount. I've been drinking a lot of milk my whole life, so I'm pretty lucky where I don't have a lactose intolerance as long as I drink whole milk. And then it also helps me get a lot of extra calories too. So if I'm able to have like about a fairly large glass of milk, that helps my satiety last a little bit longer in between meals. So it's not really during the day a true fasting, since the milk has a decent amount of calories.
Now, as far as you've obviously lost, gosh, close to 100 pounds, the guys at the fire station had to have noticed. What has been their sort of reaction or response to what you're doing diet-wise, exercise-wise, so on and so forth?
It's funny. Once I came back, the work, they were like, man, they're like, yeah, you're looking good now. You were fat before. Nobody tells you when you were fat before, which is, I thought it was pretty humorous personally. Right now, and then when they see me eating a bunch of meat and butter, the butter is kind of a stretch. The butter is more so as needed, depending on the volume of running. They think that they think I'm crazy for doing it. They're like, where's your vegetables? I was like, really, not eating vegetables is more of like a personal preference, because I don't feel like wasting my time eating something that I don't like buying. That usually goes rancid after a day or two once you got it home. And I just don't like the taste of vegetables as much. I feel like you got to do a lot more to prepare them to get them to taste halfway decent.
What, aside of weight loss, I assume, I don't know, what kind of differences have you noticed overall in health? Have you noticed anything with sleep, gut health, skin, what other things you've noticed?
Sleep has been pretty darn huge, especially when I was heavier. Even before I got hurt, I should have been sleeping with the CPAP 100%, because I was not. And then I went from pretty much irregular sleep, which you already have irregular sleep with the work schedule of being a firefighter paramedic, to just circling. And just at a point where if you're living it, you're become comfortable with it, and you're like, I guess this is how it is. And you really don't think yourself as too unhealthy until something else drastically happens. What happened to me. As of now, I can sleep in pretty much in any position. My sleep quality overall, just with the lifestyle, is not really the best by any stretch of imagination. I probably average about 6 hours per night when I'm off. And then if we get to the ability to sleep at the firehouse, then I'll take advantage of that. But it's not like we sleep all night there. There's a couple times where you can, but that's few and far between. But I'm able to recover vastly quicker with less sleep, and then I'm able to sleep comfortably on my back. I have not had an issue with my GERD. I shouldn't even call it my GERD, because it's gone. I haven't had any sort of glimpse at it at all whatsoever. I'm, for the most part, comfortable laying on my back. I don't feel like that I have any dyspnea or anything like that. And it's really a night and day difference looking back on it. Back when I was that big, I didn't really view it as too much of an issue, which right now, looking back, I'm like, I can't believe I used to live like that.
Speaking about, because what you do as a paramedic, how is that? I don't know, how long have you been doing it? You've been doing it for a few years, I assume. Have you noticed any significant changes in what you guys are responding to in the last few years? Is it more people? What kind of stuff do you typically go to see? My experience, not as a paramedic, but spending a lot of time in an emergency room, is I saw a lot of just people with chronic diseases having acute exacerbations, whether it was chest pain or diabetics going into DKA or whatever. What kind of stuff are you seeing?
Other than the overdoses and then the drug abuse runs, you pretty much hit the nail right on the head. I'm over at the station where we got a lot of nursing homes now. A lot of those people, they develop UTIs, diabetes issues, heart issues, and then they are all, for the most part, getting the same food that's at the nursing homes. It's almost like a manufacturer setup where they go in there, then they have the same issues, same medications, and then all the people are not nice, and then they just are in overall poor health, just caught up in the system, it feels like, and able to, and then I see a lot of them pretty much fairly frequently, not by their own choices is what I'm trying to say. It's not like that they're calling 911. They're just having the same recurring issues over and over again. So like the people that I see, I would say about 40%, I've seen at least one or two other times, if that makes sense, with recurring health issues.
Yeah, the frequent flyers that kind of they're reliant that a small percentage of the people heavily overutilize the healthcare system because they just continue to be sick. Do you notice anything in common? I don't know if you have privy to what they're eating or what their lifestyle is like. It's causing these recurrent trips to the ER. What do you see, or do you see anything?
I suppose from when I started, there was more. I was also working at a different department too, so it was a different demographic. So that's an unfair comparison, but it would seem like there was less of people. More people were like outside, but now it seems that there's like a lot more shut in people that come down with like a lot of simple illnesses like flu-like symptoms. There's a lot of people with back pain out there that call 911 because that nerve pain that when it hits you, you just don't know what to do. There's a lot of people with issues with diabetes that are compliant with their medications, that are well too, and have access to healthcare that have issues with controlling their medications, or they might have missed a single dose. And then we show up. A lot of people with recurring heart issues, and for the most part, and then there's lots of falls in the elderly population. I cannot speak on what their diet is, but I know that a lot of the older elderly people that we go on, they just lose their strength over a period of time, and they fall more and more. And a lot of times the family calls because they had enough of their parents not being able to get around, and then they want some help with that because they're insecure with the ability of their former caregiver to take care of themselves.
You mentioned from the beginning you injured your back, and granted you were eating garbage and probably putting yourself at risk, but one of the things is you had to lift somebody that was probably, like you said, a pretty big person. This is something unusual happened to me recently. I had some guy that was at my house that was a friend of ours that collapsed in our bathroom, and I had to resuscitate and do CPR, but I had to drag him out of the bathroom. It was a tiny bathroom. I couldn't even fit in. I could barely fit me and him in there. It was really challenging to get him out of there so you could do CPR on him. But I can imagine, how often do you hear of people getting injured in healthcare from lifting or trying to lift or trying to move a very large person? If you see that, are you the only one that's ever happened to, or has it happened to other people? I'm sure it has.
No, on my former crew, we had about 3 out of 8 firefighters that were, once I came back, I was in relatively decent shape, but that had back surgeries themselves. And then while I was off of my stent, there was 2 people that had back injury issues as well. And then both of them were unable to return to work because they were unable to rehab for a reason. They were just not able to recover. And then it's pretty sad where you go to a job where you try to do what you can to help other people, and then you really fall in love with it, then you can't come back. So I really feel bad for those coworkers that I had, but it's especially in the fire service, since we start from like a sedentary kind of state, since we're at the station waiting around for calls, then a tone drops, then we try to get there as quick as we can. So it's not like that we're warmed up all day and then going and then trying to pick somebody up. You try to pick somebody up out of the bathroom when you're in the middle of the night, 1 or 2 in the morning, when you just crawl out of bed, you got a full bladder, and then you're pretty stiff. So we are pretty prone to injuries in that aspect alone, taking out the whole scenario of lifting technique or anything like that, just because of coming in from a relaxed state to a very heightened state where somebody is having a very bad day and needs your help. That stress, and then your body's not warmed up either. It makes us very prone to injury.
Yeah, fair enough. And my understanding, at least, I mean, within the fire department, there's some physical requirements, at least to get in. And I don't know if you have to maintain that over the years, but more so than some other healthcare professions where you look at the nursing corps or even the medical corps, there's no physical requirements. And we just see tremendous physicians and healthcare providers just in really bad shape. Many of them are as fat as the patients and just as unhealthy. And are you seeing that when you're in your interactions in the ER and other places that you go to, say nursing homes where you have nursing assistants and things like that? Are you seeing a lot of poor health among healthcare providers?
Yeah, absolutely. There are physical requirements to get on to, like most full-time fire departments. They have something that's called a CPAP certification. That's in this area of the country where you have to try to get that to prove that you're physically capable, or some kind of their own physical agility that after the written exam in the civil service. But that varies a lot from department to department. But once you get on, there's like a joke that was going around when I first got hired on about how like you put on like your freshman 30 in your first year, just because of the lifestyle change and the stress from the work. You really comfort eat more than you realize that you comfort eat. So it's not everybody by any stretch of imagination, but it's very common for guys once they get hired to actually put on like at least probably about somewhere in between 10 to 20 pounds of overall weight. And this is what I can see from interactions with the hospital and nursing homes, which I don't work in the hospital. I really don't talk to people at the hospital. I only see them from my interactions of transfer and care. For the most part, they seem to have a more regular cycle where they don't have as much drastic weights like initially coming on as we do in the fire service. There seems to be a little bit more gradual, but definitely some of them have significant changes in body compositions for sure from what I've noticed. But it's just when you're stressed out dealing with people that are pretty much intolerant to you. And then you want to tell them off, but you can't. And then you just want to be done with it at the end of the day. I was pretty bad at this too. My example that I'll use is when I would get off a shift work, before I would go pick up my stepdaughter, driving an hour to get her, I would stop at Chick-fil-A and get myself a Chick-fil-A breakfast. I used to like it a lot, but so it was just the first thing that I would stuff my face with. And then that, I don't know what it is about the fast food in particular, but it might be just the convenience of getting something that's very tasty very quickly, and then and then you look for it again. You're like, oh, I got this sense of comfort with this, and so you go again and again, and then over time that adds up, and then.
Yeah, no doubt. It's convenient. It tastes good. I think most people who go to fast food place will go because they think it tastes really good, and it tends to be cheap and it's convenient, but it's not good for us. And then I can imagine you day in and day out, you see the complications that what it is to be unhealthy and how miserable the existence can be for a lot of people. They're in and out of the ER every 2 or 3 times a week sometimes or something like that. People that are repeatedly going in and out, whether it's due to drug overdoses or complications, and you're seeing it laid out right in front of you. And yet most people, even though they see that and they see how horrible the existence is, they continue on with the habits that they probably know deep down inside are driving them in the same place. How many, of your fellow coworkers, you said 3 out of 8 were injured and unable to return to work or something like that. How many of them are like taking notice and actually, hey, I need to do something with my own health?
They included me on that first count of the 3 out of 8. Those were the people that had the back surgeries before me. And then those 2 coworkers in particular, they took steps in trying to be more physically active. And then both of them have a pretty healthy body composition overall that you would see as like normal, like probably. Then the captain that had back surgery, you would see him as probably as like farm boy strong. Most people, once they had to see the evidence of like how I was able to, because I wasn't running until like June of 2022 when I actually returned back to work. And then they're like, your heart's not exploding from eating all this red meat and you're able to go. I'm like, yeah, I feel great. And they're like, what's your cholesterol? I had my cholesterol and all that, the typical blood work that you get with the biometric screen done twice last year. And then it was perfectly fine. Then I had it done last week and it was perfectly fine once again. But then there was a couple of coworkers that switched over one coworker, he actually asked for recommendations that he started to try to mimic what I did, what I was doing. And then he dropped 60 pounds himself. And then my partner that I used to ride the ambulance with, he dropped about 30 pounds himself. And then it took the 60-pound one probably about 5 months. And then my former partner on the ambulance, it took him about 4.5 to drop to 30.
And so they're adopting a similar diet to you to do that.
Not all of them by any stretch of imagination, but some of the younger guys they're realizing that what the mainstream says about meats, red meat in particular, and saturated fat being terrible for you. There has to be some fallacies in that, because for me to maintain the amount of lean tissue mass that I have and to be able to run as much as I do would be impossible if the main source of calories I was taking in was detrimental to my health. So
what negatives have you had since adopting a diet that is focused on meat? And is there been any negatives to this point?
Negatives actually that comes is a loss of convenience, I would have to say. There's some aspects because they use oil, there's garbage oils everywhere when you're cooking, and then some exotic seasonings that would not be friendly to my GI tract. So that eliminates a lot of foods that you would normally be able to go out and eat at a restaurant. It takes away a little bit of sense of community, trying to take away those bad foods. I know my wife personally, she misses the aspect of being able to go to any restaurant and being able to order whatever I want or she wants, and then that sense of just being able to eat the same thing. But she also understands that the change of my physical ability and being able to be a better dad for my kids, being compared to when I was hurt and not able to play with them at all whatsoever, to being a very active parent, is well worth the sacrifice of convenience to me and to her as well. So it's basically the loss of convenience. But if you plan, which I remember actually from watching Stan Efferding talk about it, because I went to his seminars back in 2019, ironically, where he talked about how he always brings his meat and rice with him everywhere he goes, and he goes to Cheesecake Factory because he knows that's what they got for his beef patties. But so just trying to plan ahead and then making sure that I'm satiated has been a huge deal in dealing with that convenience issue.
You said you started running ultra marathons, which what prompted you to want to do that? How did you go from powerlifting and being really strong to saying, hey, I want to run ultra marathons? And where did that decision come in?
I think that deep down, that boiled down to me actually having a healthier mindset. I think it was about December 17th of 2022. So not long before Christmas, I was like, I wonder if I can do an ultra. I was like, I know for a fact that I could run a marathon with the level of fitness I got. I never done a race or anything like that before in my life. And then I was like, hell, just take a chance. I was like, the worst you can do is not finish it. So just put yourself out there and see what you could do. So I signed up for it at that point in time. And then that race was like around February 11th. So less than 2 months after I initially signed up for it, I was able to do that. I finished 23rd out of 53. That one was a 50-kilometer trail race. And that took me 6 hours and 40 minutes.
Okay. And prior to this decision, I'm just going to start running. How much running had you done prior? I'm sure you had to run a little bit for the fire department qualifications and stuff like that, but had running been a regular part of your activities, or mostly just kind of lifting type stuff?
Lifting and walking was my main staple. Before I got hired at the fire department, I ran some with my dog when he was young. Before I got my surgery, I think I was actually planning ahead to be more active than I realized. Because before my surgery, I actually got myself a Rottweiler puppy that I knew was going to need a lot of work. So I think at that point in time, I created that need of being able to, hey, you got to get up and walk because you got something that's depending on this exercise. It's not just you. You got to get outside. You can't just be up and around the house. You have to get out. Otherwise, this dog's going to destroy everything. And then so when I was returning to work, I was getting up early. I was walking him several miles, sometimes 5-6 miles before work. And then he would still have a decent amount of energy because his fitness improved as well. That's hard to say because he was still a pretty young dog, but he wasn't really getting fatigued. And we have a small yard at the house so that he would be more tolerable. That's when I actually started running. It wasn't really for me. It was really more so just to tire out the dog before I went into work for a 24-hour shift. And then surprisingly on the diet, I was like, hey, I'm actually halfway decent at this. And then I feel pretty good. I'm recovering very quickly. I'm able to stack on a lot of mileage. So just because of having a man's best friend to do it with me and becoming better than I thought I was going to be ever, got me to be a lot more confident and sign up for these races and push myself to things which I didn't think I would be able to complete when I first signed up for them.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about occasionally you have some fruit from time to time. How does your training, you're eating mostly meat or all meat at times, how does that impact your ability to run these ultra marathons? Has it been negative? You don't have, I guess you haven't run them before, but you're still putting up decent times, it sounds like.
A lot of the fruits, because I tried to lift some before within this running training so that I wanted to, so I could preserve what strength that I would have. So that's where a lot of the fruit would actually come in. A lot of times the space in between the water, fruit, and salt, probably about 30 minutes before I would actually start working out with a resistance training of some sort. As far as I wouldn't really eat dates or anything like that before like any training runs. My first ultra marathon, the way I prepare for that is calorie wise, is I had probably about a 2 3/4 pound ribeye the night before, and then a decent amount of whole milk, and then I had some butter. So I was, all right, just on that day, I was at a 2,000 calorie surplus of what I actually needed, and I had a decent amount of calorie surplus for the previous 2 days. I don't recall exactly what they were beforehand, but I knew roughly I was going to be burning through 7,000 calories just because of my size. I didn't calculate it. That's just what I'm able to guesstimate. And for the most part, I've been pretty close. During the race, I had a total of, I didn't really feel like I needed it. I knew I wasn't drinking all that much water. It was February. It wasn't like it was burning hot. So I didn't really have all that much of a thirst drive. I had a couple of dates. I had a couple of those, which, if anything, the thing that I noticed right away is that just the fructose in the dates, it was more of like an emotional boost than anything. Like I didn't feel like that was like dry, but it's just like having that sensation of sugar. It was like, yeah, this is good. It was, when I retrospect looked at it, it was a similar sensation to having fast food. That's that kind of feeling. Oh, this is nice, but it obviously not quite to the same detrimental effect, which I don't think the dates had a detrimental effect. After the first ultra, to get myself to try to drink more water, I had a fairly decent amount of freeze-dried fruit, freeze-dried strawberries in particular, just so I would have more of a thirst appetite, because I only had about 70 ounces of water during that first race because I wasn't very thirsty. And then when I got back home from the race, I was weighing about 205 at that point in time. And then the next morning, I was at 217 pounds. And then I was very swollen. My knees were all swollen. My calves were swollen. So at that point in time, I wasn't really eating. I was just like, all right, I'm not eating more fruit, because I was pretty inflamed, but I was able to walk. And then because of the fitness I acquired at that point in time, that I was able to run 2 days later and get back on the training plan. So I was able to walk 2 days after the ultra marathon, then was back running two days.
Yeah.
And then.
Okay. You mentioned because of your size, when you go into these ultra running circles, I mean, at 210 or whatever you're at the time, you had to be one of the bigger athletes out there, I would imagine, correct? Most of the guys are probably quite a bit lighter.
The biggest, bar none. If anybody's like actually close to my weight, like around the first one, I was about 220 going into 220, roughly going into it. I don't remember what the exact weight was. I remember the afterwards weights because that's what stuck with me. Because that's really what I cared about. But yeah, if they're close to my weight, they're for the most part a good 6 inches taller, like 6'4" with longer legs. But if anybody's like close to my height, they are for the most part, it's about not more than 160. Like they're like 130, 140, 150, maybe if they're a male. I have no idea how much the females weigh, but for the most part in the ultra races, the females are fairly shorter. And if I had to guesstimate, 100 pounds or less, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay. And do you have any desire to get down to those weights to be better at ultra? Do you ever plan on dropping to 160 and becoming really lean or skinny, because you're fairly lean looking from what I can tell right now, to better your ultra performance? What is your goal here? What is the end goal for you?
My goal is, what I got drawn to from doing this aspect is there's not much I could find about people my size running an ultra marathon. So I think I've started to find like a little bit of a niche. I know that you got your world records with the rower. And I tried to rower when I was doing this ultra marathon training, and I suck at it. But I found something that I'm fairly decent at with my size. And I'll be honest, I don't want to lose my strength or muscle mass, because being strong is more fun than running. But having the ability to be able to do with these endurance runs is a pretty great thing that I don't want to lose. So I don't want to get weak. And then I want to carry this muscle with me as long as I can. And then potentially after this 100-mile race, I want to try to put on some more strength again to mix it back up instead of just constantly running down, because as relatively pretty lean right now. I'm actually the leanest I've ever been in my life, but I miss being able to lift more time out of the day. And then this running training just takes a fairly decent amount. Like when I did a 100-mile week, that was about 17, 18 hours out of just 1 week of just solely running, not talking about the recovery of walking or anything like that. Then that's hard to tie in weightlifting to, especially when you got 2 kids. So it's really time management is what that boils down to, is why I don't want to solely just run all the time and abandon lifting.
Yeah, fair enough. And I agree with you that keeping that muscle mass is a very important thing for you health-wise, metabolically, and also from disease prevention standpoint. Do you participate in social media? Do you have a social media account that you're on or anything like that?
I got 2. I got a private page on Instagram, on Facebook. That's just Tyler Larsh. That's my first and last name. And then my public page that I actually use for a personal training side hustle that I do is Tiny Tyler's Training. That's on Instagram and Facebook. The Instagram I post everything on, then it carries over to Facebook if the algorithm allows it. I'm still not even sure why some videos post all the time. They don't carry over to Facebook, but I am on Instagram at Tiny Tyler's Training. And that's Facebook and Instagram are my 2 social media accounts.
Okay. I just found you over there on Instagram. There you go. So good for you. All right. Thank you, Tyler, for doing this. I appreciate you sharing your story, and good luck to you and continued success. And hopefully you'll inspire those around you and those listening to this. So thank you for being here. Thanks a bunch.